Margarita Simonyan spoke about a serious breast illness. The editor-in-chief of Russia Today and Kremlin Aid shared her condition on the state propaganda TV channel Rossiya 1 on September 7th. According to her, the surgery will be performed on September 8th.
This week I was diagnosed with a terrible, serious illness. Tomorrow I have surgery right here under this medal. I still came...
Simonyan also recalled her husband's illness. The TV propagandist director Tigran Keosayan.
As you probably know, my husband Tigran Keosayan has been in a coma in the hospital for 9 months now. As we say in Russia, when trouble comes, it opens the gates wide. The gates in our house aren't just left unlocked anymore. They've practically been blown off by the winds of fate, if you ask me.
Margarita Simonyan is the editor-in-chief of one of the largest state media holdings, Rossiya Segodnya, which includes the RIA Novosti agency. She also heads the TV channel Russia Today, one of the main propaganda media outlets targeting audiences abroad. It became known on January 8, 2025, that Russian propagandist Tigran Keosayan had experienced clinical death and fallen into a coma. He had long-standing heart problems, but Margarita Simonyan did not disclose the exact cause of her husband's condition. At that time, she wrote,
I didn't want to say anything until the very last moment, but since reporters have already started calling, I'm writing myself. My husband, Tigran Keosayan, has experienced clinical death and is in a coma. As many people know, he has had a very sick heart for a very long time.
The scandalously notorious Kremlin propagandist and Russian TV show host Tigran Keosayan promoted Russophile and chauvinistic narratives against Ukraine. He was actively engaged in propaganda justifying the aggression against Ukraine and the war crimes committed by the occupying forces. Mass protests against the country's authorities have begun in Istanbul. This was reported by the publication Hurriyet. According to journalists, the protesters are opposing the decision to remove the leadership of the opposition Republican People's Party branch, one of whose leaders, former Istanbul Mayor Ekrem İmamoğlu, has been under arrest since May. Clashes broke out between the demonstrators and the police. The city is calling for pot-banging protests. Demonstrators are marching through the streets and banging on pots as a sign of protest against the authorities' actions. The decision to remove the leadership of the Istanbul branch of the party was made by the Istanbul Civil Court of First Instance. It annulled the results of the 2023 Congress, at which the office's leadership was elected. In addition, the Istanbul Governor's Office has announced a 3-day ban on gatherings, demonstrations, press statements, and the distribution of leaflets in several districts of the city. The ban will last until September 10th and applies to the central districts of the capital. Let us recall that Ekrem İmamoğlu is considered Erdogan's main rival in the 2028 elections, which is why his case in Turkey is seen as a politically motivated attempt to eliminate a competitor. He was detained on March 19, 2025. This also sparked a wave of mass protests in Turkey. At that time, more than 2 million people took to the streets to protest the arrest of the mayor of Istanbul. The Turkish opposition began collecting signatures for early presidential elections. A few days later, the politician was removed from his position as mayor of Istanbul and accused of bribery. In July, he was sentenced to 1 year and 8 months in prison. The war economy continues to take its toll on Russia. The country is preparing for budget cuts. This is reported by the Financial Times. Oil and gas revenues have fallen by 20% since the beginning of the year, GDP growth has slowed by almost half, and the budget deficit has reached 4,900 billion rubles. The Ministry of Finance is already discussing cuts to non-military spending, infrastructure, subsidies for clubs and sanatoriums. Economists believe that the gaps will be filled through new borrowing and partially from the reserve fund, half of which has already been spent on the war. Experts note that for the first time, the Kremlin is facing the need for real trade-offs in the budget. They will have to choose between military spending and social programs. At the same time, the risk of recession is becoming more likely. Russian regions have also faced a fuel shortage. 95-octane gasoline has started to disappear from gas stations even in Moscow. The same situation is happening in Saratov. Residents complain that they are forced to buy lower-quality 92-octane gasoline. One of the city's gas station chains was forced to admit that there is no gasoline in the city and there won't be any. According to media reports, fuel has virtually disappeared from gas stations in Zabaikalsky Krai, Primorye, and the Russian-occupied territories of Crimea and Luhansk. As reported by the Telegram channel Kremlin Snuffbox, the Russian government was unpleasantly surprised by the reaction to the publication about the possible introduction of food ration cards for certain categories of Russians due to rising prices. According to one of the channel's sources, a food shortage in Russia is allegedly not expected, but he supports ration cards as a way to protect a significant portion of fellow citizens from problems and to give them constant access to basic foodstuffs. Meanwhile, the European Union may introduce new sanctions against Russian banks and energy companies. This may be done as part of the latest round of measures aimed at putting pressure on the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin to end the war against Ukraine. This was reported by Bloomberg, citing people familiar with the matter. US President Donald Trump responded to the massive shelling of Kyiv by the aggressor country, which Russia carried out on September 7th. As CNN writes, the American leader stated that he is not pleased with the situation in Ukraine. According to him,
"I'm not happy about what's happening there. I believe we will resolve this."
Trump stated that in the next few days he will have a conversation with the Russian dictator Vladimir Putin. In addition, the American leader is ready to move on to the second stage of imposing sanctions against Russia. In response to journalists' questions about whether the White House is ready to impose sanctions against the Kremlin and punish Putin for the massive strikes on Ukraine, Trump answered in the affirmative. He also added that at the beginning of the week, some European leaders will visit the White House, with whom he will discuss Russia's war against Ukraine. According to Sky News, in response to Trump's statement about being ready to strengthen sanctions, the Kremlin said that Europe and Ukraine are doing everything possible to draw the US into their orbit. According to the publication, they also added that no sanctions will ever be able to force Russia to change its position. It should be noted that despite the efforts of Donald Trump and European leaders to achieve peace, Russia continues to ignore the peace process, intensifying its shelling of Ukrainian cities. On the night of September 7th, Russia carried out another massive strike on Ukraine, using more than 800 attack drones and missiles. In particular, as a result of the attack, a 9-story residential building in the Sviatoshinsky district of the capital was partially destroyed from the 4th to the 8th floors. 3 people were killed there. Among them were a mother and her 2-month-old son. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky emphasized that Russia continues to kill when real diplomacy could have started long ago, committing a deliberate crime and prolonging the war. Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Oleksandr Syrsky, stated that Ukrainian forces are achieving successes in several areas of the front. On his Facebook page, he reported that in the Pokrovsk and Dobropilya directions, a significant portion of territory has been deoccupied. According to him, the Pokrovsk direction remains one of the most difficult.
Over the past week, our units have repelled about 350 enemy attacks. It is here that the Russians have concentrated their main efforts and created the largest assault grouping, attempting to break through our defenses.
Syrsky noted that despite this, the Defense Forces units managed to regain control over 26 square kilometers of territory, having lost 5 square kilometers in August. The situation is similar in the Dobropilya direction. In addition, according to the Deep State Project, the Ukrainian armed forces have cleared the settlement of Vladimirovka in Donetsk region of occupiers and have also pushed the enemy back in the areas of the villages of Razina, Zolotoy Kolodets and Novotoretskoye. The commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, also summed up the results of August. According to him, for the occupiers, this month was one of the months with the least territorial gains in recent times. At the same time, Ukraine's defense forces have their own successes. Overall, in August, control was restored over 58 square kilometers of land, and a number of settlements were liberated. The commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces added that during the month, Ukrainian deep strike assets struck 60 targets on Russian territory, as a result of which the aggressor country's ability to produce fuel and lubricants for the army, missiles and drones, as well as air defense systems, was weakened. The founder of the world's largest private military company, Blackwater, Eric Prince, is seeking opportunities to acquire Ukrainian companies involved in drone production. According to The Guardian, citing sources, Prince has been promoting himself in Ukraine's drone sector and seeking meetings with representatives of leading companies in this field. As a source told the publication,
Eric is entering the market to buy companies that manufacture drones.
The publication notes that Prince has been interested in Ukraine for a long time. Back in 2020, he proposed a multi-billion-dollar plan to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, involving the use of his private army to resolve the frozen conflict in Donbas. But at that time, the deal did not go through. Now the interest of the founder of the world's largest private military company coincides with attempts by US President Donald Trump to act as a mediator in brokering a peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. It is known that the Blackwater PMC was actively operating in Iraq and Afghanistan, carrying out missions for the CIA, the State Department, and the Pentagon. However, after the incident in 2007 in Baghdad, when PMC fighters killed civilians, the company's reputation suffered a serious blow. Meanwhile, in Russia, panic had already begun over Eric Prince's interest in Ukrainian drone manufacturing companies. Some propaganda media outlets started writing that Ukraine might supposedly get its own mercenary army.